Hey everybody, how's it going? Do you remember a time when you were really excited for a game? Something new or interesting, only to end up being disappointed by it and wish you had never spent your money on it? Recently, Nukon Studios announced a new Terminator survival game. After seeing that they released a trailer before even coming up with a title for the game itself, I suddenly had a flashback to a game that I once bought. I ended up regretting buying this game so badly that to this day, how terrible it was has become an inside joke with people that I know. So it got me thinking, what are the top 10 games that I regret buying? Assassin's Creed Unity. I love the Assassin's Creed franchise, but I think many would agree that they went through a bit of a rough patch after Black Flag. Assassin's Creed Unity was one that I wasn't even sure about before I bought it, but after starting it, I immediately realized that I had no desire to finish it. I eventually did, but the game was clunky and the movement felt slow and bogged down at times. Combat felt uncomfortably different as well. Not to mention, there were so many bugs and glitches that it constantly broke my immersion. Sadly, after finishing the game, I wished that I had just waited to see if it would be worth it before I bought it. Iron Man. Growing up, I remember seeing the Iron Man film and absolutely loving the character. So when I saw that there was a game based on the film, I was absolutely thrilled. Once I started playing, however, the game felt like it was just a helicopter game with an Iron Man skin. I was pretty disappointed to realize that nearly the entire game was in the air, with ground combat being pretty much non-existent. You could go on the ground, but there wasn't much to do except maybe attack a tank that you could already attack from the sky. It wasn't a bad game necessarily, but it definitely was disappointing compared to what I had anticipated as a kid. Spider-Man 3. One of my favorite games of all time was Spider-Man 2 for the PlayStation 2. Given how amazing that game was, I was really excited to play the third installment. Huge mistake. Not only was web slinging completely different, but the game felt unfinished overall. If I remember correctly, key moments and villains in the trailer for the game didn't even make it into the game itself. The way the game followed the movie's storyline felt more like they were basing their story off of a trailer rather than the film itself. The combat was different and felt much more rigid than how smooth it was in the previous title. And the game just wasn't fun. I remember struggling as a kid to understand how they could mess up something that they did so well in the previous title. The Sims 4. I was a huge fan of Sims 2 and 3, so when I saw that they were releasing the fourth title, I was really excited. What more could they bring? What new features would there be? How much would they revolutionize the mechanics? Sadly, the game ended up feeling like a step back. Unlike the previous Sims games, there were no pools, no basements, no toddlers, no open world, babies were locked to their bassinets, teens were the same size as adults for some reason, the terrain was completely flat without any ability to modify or adjust it, and so on. Seriously, there are dedicated lists online to all of the countless features that they didn't bother bringing over. Then, after that, they announced that they would be releasing those features as paid DLC. I was pretty livid at the time. I couldn't believe that they would exclude so many common features only to require you to spend close to $450 in total if you wanted all of the DLC that they were planning on including. Oh wait, this is an EA game. This is one of those fool me X amount of time situations, right? I guess I should have known better. Needless to say, I never bought a single DLC for this one and simply went back to playing Sims 3. Assassin's Creed 3. I actually binged most of the early Assassin's Creed games all in one, so when I finally reached the third title, I was taken aback by how clunky and slow it was. Even the story was putting me to sleep. It's not that the subject matter was boring, but the trope of having the monotone monologues over the game made me want to take a nap. The gameplay wasn't nearly as fun as previous titles, and sadly, the spin-off Liberation was more interesting than the actual game itself. To this day, it is probably my least favorite Assassin's Creed title. I have heard that the remake for this game is actually pretty good, so maybe someday I will go back and give this one another chance. Horizon Zero Dawn. This is probably going to be one of the more controversial choices in my list, given how popular this game is. There were a lot of open-world third-person shooters out at the time that Horizon Zero Dawn launched. In fact, I wasn't even going to play it, but so many people were praising this game like it was the next big thing that I decided to take a risk on it. What I found was another basic open world third-person shooter. To me, the creatures throughout the world just looked like the tech dinos from Ark Survival Evolved. People were praising the graphics, but games that came out around the same time or even years before put this game to shame. Uncharted and Tomb Raider come to mind, just to name a couple. The open world became very boring and tedious to explore for me personally, and I thought it was sad that I enjoyed exploring the open world of Mass Effect Andromeda, arguably a worse game, more so than I did Horizon's world. As for the story, I can't really say much about it because I became so bored with this game that I never even finished it. Now, I may go back to it someday, but after seeing that many people were disappointed with the sequel, my hopes are not high. I'm not saying that it's a bad game, it was just massively overhyped to the point that I personally did not enjoy it. Final Fantasy IX. I love the Final Fantasy franchise. After being blown away by 7 and 8, I was very excited to play 9. But I had no idea what was in store for me. The characters were much more cartoony and anthropomorphic than the other Final Fantasy characters I was used to, which is fine, but not what I was expecting based on the previous titles that I had just played up until this point. As I got into the game, the story was odd. There were, frankly, a lot of creepy and suggestive behaviors towards one of the female characters in the game. A character that they not only kidnapped, but was also a child. Seeing the constant inappropriate suggestions and physical compliments from most of the characters in your crew towards an underage kidnapped child did not sit well with me. There was even one character who made a doll of the child and specifically wrote her age younger than what the character actually was on the doll itself. And this was a doll that he apparently couldn't sleep without. So I ended up stopping playing the game pretty early on, and I have yet to return to this one. It's possible that if you can look past this unusual story choice, that it's an amazing game. In fact, when I was trying to research this for my video, I couldn't find anyone else mentioning these specific issues. So I'm assuming that the creepy dialogue must have only been towards the beginning of the game, as this is one of the most beloved Final Fantasy games ever created. Marvel's Avengers. I was so excited for this game. I love the new Tomb Raider games, so seeing that the same studio would be making an Avengers game that would supposedly grow and add more characters over time sounded incredible. I took the risk and pre-ordered this game, since they marketed it by saying that if you pre-ordered on PlayStation, you would unlock the ability to play as Spider-Man. What we ended up getting, however, were broken promises and a broken game. The game was so glitchy and buggy that it completely ruined the experience. Unlocking outfits for your character was an incredibly tedious and grindy process. It often took weeks to actually accomplish, and then once you finally unlocked your outfits, they would disappear from your inventory with no way to use them. So not only did you grind through an annoying, repetitive game for weeks on end, but then you got your final reward taken from you. On top of that, their pre-order promise of Spider-Man didn't even make it into the game until well over a year after the game came out. This is, without a doubt, one of the biggest screw yous a studio has ever done to its fans. I don't just wish that I never bought the game, I wish I could take back all of the time that I wasted playing it. That being said, the developers' Guardians of the Galaxy game that they made later on was actually an amazing game and far from a disappointment. Terminator Salvation. The year was 2009. A teenage me had just seen the Terminator Salvation movie with my best friend. We were talking about how badass a Terminator game would be, especially if done in the style of maybe Call of Duty Zombies, with different maps and rounds of increasingly challenging enemies. Then, when I saw that they were coming out with a movie tie-in game, I was thrilled. I went straight to the store to buy it. Little did I know this would be the worst gaming purchase I have ever made. The game basically came across as a very poor attempt at a Gears of War clone skinned as a Terminator game. The Terminators were easy to kill, and there were far too many of them. The levels were bland and boring to get through. By the end of the game, my friend and I were both left confused, thinking, wait, surely this isn't the end. Wait, this is it? There was no big fight against a difficult to take down Terminator, no Arnold inclusion, and it didn't even have anything to do with the movie that the game was supposedly a tie-in for. It was just a boring shooter with a short story, bad graphics, clunky mechanics, and no payoff. I have never been more disappointed by a game, as I think a Terminator game done right would be absolutely amazing, especially if it's one where you have to survive against a seemingly impossible to defeat Terminator. They recently announced a yet-to-be-named Terminator game, and I, for one, will definitely wait until after it launches. Marvel's Future Fight. This is a game that started out great, a phone game featuring many of Marvel's heroes and villains, even ones that most people who never read the comics wouldn't even be aware of, something that I absolutely appreciated. It was fun and easy to unlock characters. You could play the game passively and unlock every character for free, until you couldn't. They began slowly introducing loot boxes, pay-to-win mechanics, and even characters that were locked behind paywalls. When it first started, I was willing to pay for some of these features, something that was a huge mistake on my part. The game spiraled down and down until it became something that, if you wanted to be good at or have any chance of winning, you would have to spend an enormous amount of money on. And if you decided that you would just try to play it without paying, you'd be constantly reminded by harassing pop-ups telling you to spend money. Seeing the decline into a gambling, paywall-ridden game makes it the #1 game that I wish I had never spent money on. But what about you? What are some games that you regret spending money on? Feel free to let me know in the comments below and we can talk about it. I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your day, your week, and I will see you in the next video.